All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to Wednesday Night Reviews. I'm your host, Konrad, and joining me today on the right side of your screen is Riley Hamilton, and we're going to talk about their new book coming out, SPQR, which you could find on Kickstarter. So, Riley, thanks for coming onto the show today.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Thank you kindly. So, first things first, one, congratulations on the upcoming book. It's very
Thank you.
exciting.
Yeah, it's very exciting. This is a whole new experience for me. I've never gotten this far on my own before, so we'll see how things go, but hoping things are going to go great.
Perfect. That's so exciting to hear. As a supporter of local, I always like to showcase our local creators. So, one, I'd like to ask, are you a natural born or immigrated Canadian? And where in this big country of ours are you located?
I am a natural born Canadian. I'm located, born and raised in Ottawa, Ontario, and it's where I still live.
Awesome. Now, on your end, like you said, it was basically this is the furthest you've gotten when it comes to creating your own book. You've sent a copy to me, so I've seen the whole first issue. Congratulations again on making a comic. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Where did you get your start in comics?
Oh boy, so we're going to be going back a ways, as I'm sure you've heard from a lot of creators that they start young, or they're at least introduced to it when they're young.
Mm-hmm.
It was the same thing for me. The earliest memory I can think of a comic related thing, so not comics themselves, but sort of a comic related thing, was when I was about, I don't know, 6 maybe, and watching Batman Beyond on
Oh,
TV. That was
good
like
old
my
Terry.
first. Yeah, exactly. Terry McGinnis, my man. That was my first sort of comic related media that I ever saw. After that, I saw the Justice League series as well, a little bit less, but Batman Beyond was sort of the first thing that I can definitively remember sitting down and watching. As for comics themselves, the first one that I can remember ever getting, so I knew they existed. I had sort of seen them. I was like, I saw it on a shelf. I'd be like, oh, that's kind of cool, whatever, no big deal. But the one that I distinctly remember was when I was 8. And when I was 8, the thing that was all the rage at school was Yu-Gi-Oh cards.
Yep.
That was the big thing. That was if you had certain Yu-Gi-Oh cards, that was like your status. You were a god of the playground if you had, a piece of Exodia or one other of those special
Yes.
unique cards. And I remember there was a comic shop sort of not super close to my place, but close enough. It was within driving distance,
Mm-hmm.
called the Comic Book Shop. It's one of sort of the iconic comic book stores in Ottawa. They have a couple of locations, and the one that I went to was the original. And I went in there with my parents, solely focused on, I'm getting my Yu-Gi-Oh cards. That's what I'm here for. Nothing else matters.
I mean, I
That
love the
was
drive.
a big thing. And I remember I was like, okay, I got my starter set. And I was like, okay, good, whatever. And the cashier was like, hey, it's free comic book day. Here you go. We're gonna give you, here's a free comic to go with your Yu-Gi-Oh cards. Enjoy it.
Nice.
And I was like, oh, okay, they're giving me a book. Okay, sure, maybe I'll look at it at some point. And the issue that I had gotten for free comic book day was issue 1 of Brian Michael Bendis and Mark Bagley's Ultimate Spider-Man. So
Oh,
that sort of relaunch where they sort of reintroduced everything and modernized sort of the Spider-Man mythos for the next generation that they had done sort of at the beginning of the 2000s. That was the first comic book that I ever sort of sat down and got.
wow.
So that was a hell of an introductory drug.
Yeah, seriously.
That was a true gateway drug into
Wow.
comics for me, because after that I read that thing so much it was like falling apart. I don't have it anymore. It was thrown out because it was just it was just totally destroyed by the
Oh,
time I had, read through it hundreds of times. So that was the big thing. I never collected sort of regularly because I was really too young when I first got into it. I didn't have
yeah.
no allowance or anything like that, and the comic book store wasn't close enough that I could just ride my bike over there. It was always sort of a distance away.
Mm-hmm.
So it would always be like if you were going to the comic book shop, it was for a special occasion. You went
Yeah.
there on purpose, as opposed to you just, sort of, oh, hey, I have nothing to do this afternoon. Let's go to the comic book shop. It was a little too far for that. So I'd always go there sort of with a purpose to get a book or to look for a book in specifically. And I started with Ultimate Spider-Man. That was mostly what I read early on. And then I sort of dropped off a bit as I got a bit older, got into, video games, other things
Yeah.
like that. And by the time I circled back around to comics, sort of reading them and picking them up regularly, was sort of late high school, early university, when I had, a job and I could actually pay for my own books.
Yep.
So then I went back and, you know, collected all the volumes of Ultimate Spider-Man, and looked at other stuff like Blackest Night was one of the first things I picked up from DC. And then branched off into sort of, the quote unquote indie publishers, even though they're not really indie anymore, but, like Image and Valiant and Boom Studios and Dynamite and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, people can. They are indie in a manner of speaking because they're not just superheroes, but yeah, they're giant companies at this point pumping out tons of books. It's not. I get what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was sort of my initial start, and then it was sort of rekindled when I got into university and met up with Brendan Montgomery, who you actually interviewed a few weeks ago on your show, and I was one of the team that he talked about who helped write and work on Gale Force.
And that's at Queen's University in Kingston, correct?
Kingston, yes, yeah. That's correct.
Awesome. Now, for the readers at home, or not the readers at home, the viewers at home, who also probably are readers, and myself, to be clear, the Ultimate Spider-Man by Bendis that you sort of got your start on, is that the run with Miles or Peter?
So it starts with Peter, and that whole run, that whole series, I devoured that series religiously. So that story, it starts off with Peter. I think it ran for about 10 years.
Whoa.
Yeah, it ran for a long time. It ran for 10 years or so.
Oh my God.
And the first 8 or 9, it was Peter.
Okay.
And then at the end of it, the Green Goblin actually killed him off. Spoiler alert for everybody. But I mean, it's been 10 years, so I mean,
it's fine.
If you're being spoiled now, I mean, I think the statute of limitations has expired on that one.
Yeah.
But he's killed by the Green Goblin, and then it was actually Bendis and them who created Miles and introduced him sort of when they relaunched that Ultimate Spider-Man book a few months to a year later.
Wow.
And that was his first appearance. So actually with Miles Morales just coming out on the PS5, it's sort of he's sort of back in the spotlight, and it's sort of to see where he got started. And he did actually get started in Ultimate Spider-Man after they had sort of killed off Peter.
Yeah, now a bit of a tangent, but because I have a friend of mine who's very much into Spider-Man and loves that run in particular. Now, one thing that he told me was when they killed off Peter, they created Miles. Miles had his run, and if I'm not mistaken, Marvel wanted to deal or get away out of the Ultimate universe, because I think they had Ultimate X-Men, Ultimate Spider-Man, so they were just going to kill off all the Ultimate universes and go back to Prime, is what DC calls it. But Bendis was like, yeah, no, we're going to bring Miles into this. I just think that's super cool, a little bit of nerd trivia where, yeah, they wanted to keep him so bad that they were just like, yeah, no, we're going to keep him.
Yeah, and he's now a fan favorite, and he's been for a number of years. So there was definitely, I think there was actually fan backlash when they actually did the Ultimatum arc, which is where Magneto and everyone actually kills everyone in the Ultimate Universe.
Whoa.
And that was, let's just say it was controversial, if I'm going to be polite, when they did that.
Okay.
So it was, like I said, controversial, and they ended up bringing over a lot of characters. So, I mean, that's also where we got the whole arc of The Prowler being Miles's uncle also came
Yes.
from Ultimate.
Oh,
So even
okay.
though he had been a character in the 616 which universe, which is sort of the prime universe for Marvel, he had been a character in there as a separate character. I think it was Hobie Brown, if I remember correctly. But then they brought him in. When they retconned and then brought Miles into the prime the 616 universe. Now this is me remembering, so I might be remembering this wrong, and I'm sure someone will point out if I am wrong. But they brought over that whole Aaron Davis as the Prowler thing. They retconned that in when they brought Miles over to the Prime universe.
Awesome. And you're probably right. If you've got something in there wrong, yeah, someone will probably point it out, but that's just our nature in comic book fans, but that's super cool. Yeah, as we've been talking about, Miles Morales very popular right now between the video game into the Spider-Verse, in which you can see both Miles' origin and his uncle who becomes Prowler, or is Prowler, I suppose. But yeah, just mild spoiler there, I guess. Oh well. So yes, we've talked about your interest in comics. As you mentioned, you worked on Gale Force with Brendan to basically create a 3-issue story, which ended up being put into a graphic novel. So you've had your hand in creating comics. As I understand it, on that project, you worked as a writer, correct?
So on that project, I worked as a writer and a letterer. So I did both the writing and the lettering. I did lettering for about half of issue one. Brendan did sort of the other half of issue one. I did a couple of pages on two,
Mm-hmm.
not very much, and then I didn't do any lettering on three. And when I had actually came into the club, so I was not in the club to start with, like when it first got its start, it was one of those things where I'd been on campus for at university for I guess 2 years, going into my third year,
Okay.
and I hadn't really found a club sort of in my first couple of years. Like I had done a little bit of Model UN stuff, and I had gone to the board game club because they'd have like a weekly board game night where you just hang out and play board games, very casual, not really like a there was a little bit of a core group, but it was more just like a drop in and have some fun on a free night sort of thing. But I remember I was walking through one of the buildings at Queens, Mac Corey Hall, the maze as everyone knows it. Um,
Okay.
and they had this the student government had this like poster up about their sort of like awards for clubs.
Mm-hmm.
So like which club was like the most popular, which club had the biggest event, things like that. And one of the categories they had was most improved club.
Oh.
And the thing that stood out, at least to start with, was I was walking by, and the first thing that stood out to me was the logo, the club logo, which was the Queen's University Q inside of the old DC logo. So like the DC logo from 2000, like the 90s.
With the swirl around it, right?
Not the one with the sword, the one right before that. It's the circle with the stars on sort of either end. And it's
Yeah.
Brendan swapped that out for a Q. And that was the thing that noticed me. I was like, hey, that kind of looks like the DC logo. And I saw it said most improved club, Queen's Comic Book Legion. And I was like, ooh, there's a comic book club. I've never heard of this. So I was like, I had to look through it. I was like, that's cool. I think I'll have to go to one of their meetings or their next meeting. And it had been listed for, the beginning of September. I went in there. They had already actually, when I got there, they had already, settled on the idea of creating their own comic. That had already been sort of settled, and they had
Mm-hmm.
actually written out the whole first issue. The first issue
Wow.
had been written when I joined, and they were in the process of, doing character concepts and, starting to decide, okay, how are we going to, actually get this drawn and, scanned and colored and all that
Well,
sort of stuff.
wow.
So I sort of came on partway through that first issue. And then once we had sort of gotten the ball rolling on that, me and one of the other guys in the club had been like, oh, we're writers. We do want us to write like more issues because that's cool. That's something that we like. That's something that we're maybe good at.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll do you want us to do that? And Brendan was like, yeah, sure. I mean, we wanted to have more than one issue, and we left the first issue on a huge cliffhanger. So it's one of those things where you can't. It would be a bad look to leave it on the cliffhanger that we left the first issue on and then not continue. So
Awesome.
we wrote. 2 and 3. I wrote most of 2, and the other guy in the club wrote most of 3.
Mm-hmm.
We sort of, went back and forth on a few things and changed it and tweaked a few things here and there, but we wrote 2 and 3, and then we helped out where we could on mostly lettering, because my artistic ability is non-existent. Absolutely, just no. I've tried to improve a little bit, but it's not. It is not very good. My artistic skills have not improved since about the age of 10. So
I know the
I was like,
feeling.
okay, so the drawing and the coloring is not really my thing, but the lettering, oh sure, I could try that. I'll help out where I can. And I was like, maybe I can do that. So it was an experience, especially lettering, because you find out, what works and what doesn't, and you have to try and really play around with, oh, this is like cool bits of the art, but you want to make sure that you don't cover up all the cool parts of the art with text, but you need to find a place to put the text and to put the speech bubbles and the tails and all that. So it's quite a balancing act. It's much more difficult than I think a lot of people realize. And letterers, I think, are very underappreciated in the work that they do.
Agreed. I multiple occasions when I've gone through it, and I almost, for certain comics, usually they're pretty good, but for certain comics I even find it hard to see where it states letterer and then gives you the name of the person. But yeah, there are certain books that without a letterer they would just be trash. Like actually one of my favorite books, Batman Arkham Asylum, by Grant Morrison and Dave McKean, the lettering in that is wild. And without that, like if someone had just gone into like, I don't know, use Arial or Times New Roman font and read out all the words, trash book all of a sudden. So yeah, the letterers are like a little bit of an unsung hero, because yeah, they make or break a book. Like I just yeah.
Yeah, because it's one of those things. I like to compare it to special effects in the sense of like, if the special effects are good, you don't notice it. But if it's bad, it really stands out and can ruin the experience for you. And I feel that lettering, there's a lot of times when lettering stands out for good reasons, but generally if I'm thinking like, if I'm being drawn mostly like, oh, the letters, like, oh. If it's noticeably not good, it really takes away from the experience, I feel.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, like I said, if when I've come across bad lettering, because it's out there, it totally disengages you from the book. Whereas like good lettering is like, okay, cool, and it's speech bubbles. But yeah, it's such an important and integral part of comics, but people don't like to talk about letterers. Or colorists, because or colorists. We can get into that.
Colorists, I think.
Yeah, we can get into that too. But yeah, that's lettering is I think so important, but no one likes to talk about it. But yeah, so you like I said, you were able to do the lettering there, and then have you lettered other stuff since then?
No, the only thing, I do not have enough faith in my skills to be like, hey, I'll letter a book for you, because I lettered SPQR myself entirely.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, that I feel like that's my own work. I'm not,
Yeah.
impugning myself onto somebody else's work. So I have more faith, doing it for my own work and for my own sake. But no, I've not lettered for any other book, and I don't know if I don't feel confident enough in my skills as a letterer at this point to be willing to say, hey, I'll letter this for you and it will turn out good enough for, you to feel comfortable, me investing it in someone else's project, because it's important to them, and I don't feel my skills are good enough to sort of take someone else's creation into my own hands, if that makes sense to you.
Absolutely, yeah, because you're leaving your mark on their work, and like we've talked about the importance of lettering. If your lettering isn't good on their work, for instance, it could take away from it. And that's not a good thing. I've just got I've got two monitors. I've got SPQ here,
Fair enough.
SPQR there. I think a few more issues. I bet you'll have that confidence.